So today we're going to be talking about the twofold hybrid hexagon twist. And that's twofold for twofold rotationally symmetric. So where most hexagons you think of as sixfold rotational symmetry, 6 ways to rotate it around so that you see the same thing. With the twofold twist, you have 2 ways to rotate it around and see the same thing. And why am I calling this a hexagon? It's because it still has 6 pleats going into it. 1, 2, and a third one tucked underneath on each side. And we're going to be using a 24-fold triangle grid on a square. So zooming out so you can see what's going on there. To fold this pattern specifically, although not this pattern in this size, but we'll get a good number of repeats in and look a little bit at the crease pattern, a little bit at what else you can do with these, and make sure to stay tuned to the very end where I'll show a whole pile of other tessellations in other structures that I've made with this twist. So, starting in the center, we're going to find the center of the paper and start actually with an open hexagon twist. So I'm going to make sure I find the center by folding in half. Then I can either follow my pinch point from the construction of the grid around, or fold in half the other direction to find that center. And once we do have the center, we're going to run mountain folds, and this is going to be specifically a right-handed open hexagon twist. So our mountains are going to run in these locations, and our valleys are going to be one spacing further out. So this is 6-fold rotationally symmetric, and then we're going to change the twist to make it 2-fold rotationally symmetric. I just want to start with these pleats. And one of the things that's going on here is that all of my mountain folds are approaching the center, but they're not running exactly to the center. They're going one space away from the center. And this is different from a closed hexagon twist, where all of the mountain folds would be coming exactly to the center. So the hybrid part of hybrid hexagon twist is combining the properties of closed and open, where some pleats obey closed properties and other pleats obey open ones. So before we squash anything, before we change what we're looking at, I want to take a moment to look at the crease pattern, which you can see now. And one thing to pay attention to is this crease pattern is oriented so that the edge parallel grid lines are vertical. And I made sure to match that when I was folding. But when we go back, and actually the way to do it is going to be to see both at the same time. So I've got my edge parallel grid lines vertical. I've got my twist in place. And what we want to do, I'll zoom in on one of these. Apparently that's as far as I can zoom in this program, is to shift 2 of the pleats. So specifically, I'm going to be taking this pleat where the pleat is going down and to the right, and the pleat opposite and going up and to the left. And I'm going to move those pleats so that the mountain is headed to the center of the paper. So effectively this means shifting the mountain over, following that arrow, and putting the valley where the mountain was, while keeping all of my neighboring pleats. And notice this just hid a corner of the hexagon underneath. So on the opposite side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to lift up so I can shift that pleat over, being careful not to undo any of my other existing pleats. And with everything back in place, I have my new hybrid hexagon twist. Now notice that this rectangle shape is rotated when it's folded on the paper relative to the crease pattern. But what I was keying off of is the direction of the pleat that was moved. So that's going to be something that comes back again and again. We're always, when we're looking at crease patterns, needing to pay attention to where the pleats are going because they are not rotating. And so we can take this, and I often use my bone folder to reach underneath and smooth out those little pockets. So you can see there's these two diamonds, and I'm going to smooth those out to form my twist. And for a while, I thought that this was the only two-fold rotationally symmetric hybrid hexagon twist. I didn't think that you could make another one, but it turns out that you can, and that's another thing that I'll demonstrate towards the end. But for today's purposes, actually one thing I want to be careful to do is keep the orientation of everything so that I can refer back to the crease pattern, and see exactly where things need to go. One thing that I'll do to make it easier to see what I'm working on here is do some markings on my paper that will help us to be able to translate between the crease pattern and the folded form. So first off, I've got this in the same orientation as the crease pattern. Each of these hybrid hexagon twists is exactly the same orientation, same positions of triangles, etc. And they're all in positions of two-fold rotational symmetry, which means that the distance that a triangle is on one side is the same distance that it is on the opposite side. And also, we can see these spacings between mountains are the same on opposite sides. So top and bottom, we're going to have 2 spaces between mountains. On this upper right-hand side, we're going to have 3 spaces, and same for the lower left. And that's as well, I can go ahead and put that we're going to have 2 spaces over here and down here. And that's as much information as we need to go ahead and fold the whole thing. So coming back to a fuller view of the desk, now it's time to fold my closed triangle twists around this hexagon, and that's going to cause new hexagons to show up because we're still in the hexagons and triangles 6-fold tiling. We just have a little bit different way of showing it. So I'm going to choose and I'm going to be flipping back and forth a decent amount here to show this. I'm going to choose to work on this pleat first. And since I made my markings from the hexagon side, By the way, we're putting closed triangles on the back. I'm going to pinch this mountain, pinch that pleat before I flip over. So that is now showing me exactly the grid intersection where the closed triangle twist needs to go. And I can go ahead and squash that closed triangle. And as I do that, I'm paying attention that this triangle center is 2 spaces out from this corner that's tucked in. So on the other side, it will also be 2 spaces out, but we're going to wait to fold that one until we come around to it. Flipping back to where I have my references drawn on, and actually I'm going to be careful to flip so we're in the same orientation as before, I'm going to choose to go up here next because it'll give me a good pleat overlap in here when I want to make the next hybrid hexagon twist. So I'm going to, again, pinch the new pleat, and I'm going to flip top to bottom because that'll put this in a nicer position for me to hold on to, and find my target grid intersection to finish out my closed triangle twist. And this one I notice is kind of a spacing and a half, or you could think of it as going across the hole and then one more spacing to the center. So the opposite pleat across the hole and one more spacing to the center. And then flipping back again, I could choose to go ahead and put in this hybrid hexagon twist here. There's pros and cons to doing that, but what I want to do next is get all of these triangles in, and this is really a first time around the center technique where I want to get all 6 of these triangles and then do the next hexagons. Usually I will be going around adding 2 triangles for each new hexagon and going around 2 triangles in a hexagon, 2 triangles in a hexagon all the way around. But since it's the first ring around and we're still figuring out where all the triangles even are, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one back around, pinching that pleat in place, flipping top to bottom so it's closer for me to work with, and setting up the new closed triangle twist and squashing. So this is also going to be 2 spacings out from where that pleat comes out from under the twist. So that's really convenient. All of my spacings are 2 spacings. So I can go ahead and continue without the crease pattern, just knowing that wherever I see the pleat start to come out from under the twist, it's going to be 2 spacings to the center of my triangle. So I'll rotate around, and I'm going to do a full half turn, full half, and go ahead and put in my remaining 3 triangle twists that are on the other side of my hybrid hexagon. And I'm moving a little bit fast through this because we've already seen these put in on the opposite side. And after all, this is an advanced tutorial. So I think that all of you will have experience putting in closed triangle twists. Now for this last one, what I want to do to get consistent pleat overlaps all the way around is to reorder these two pleats that are crossing. So I want to pop the existing pleat down where the valley of my new twist is coming through, fully set up the pleat for my new twist, and then let the older twist come through after. And again, I did speed through that a little because reordering pleat overlaps is one of the first things that you learn when you're folding origami tessellations. And again, this is an advanced video. So next up here, I'm going to flip back to the hybrid hexagon side, and I'm going to rotate my paper so that my edge parallels are vertical. So this is more of a orienting step and less something that you absolutely have to do. But it gets us back in the orientation that we were in before. So next up, it's time to fold our next hybrid hexagon twist around the central one. And I'm going to arbitrarily choose this one to start with because it's on my lower right hand side. And what I can do is I can look up at the existing twist and see how these two directions of pleats map onto my twist. And so what this is going to be actually is the one coming from above and the notch underneath. So something that happens when you have that notch is that the pleat coming through from above continues on after this little point. It continues on another 2 spacings. And I can say this because I have substantial experience with these twists now. And so we're going to go 2 spacings below where the diagonal pleat is coming in before we put in our next pleat. And this is going to be 3 grid spacings away from the prior mountain in the same direction, just like we had 3 grid spacings off of the previous twist. Now notice if I was doing a normal open hexagon twist, this would be 1 spacing further up. But we're not doing that, we're doing the hybrid. And so effectively what happened is this pleat was going to be here and shifted up. But since we already have pleats in the paper, we can't like perform that action for each new twist. And so here I've got my 1 in, 1 out, like I generally do with the open hexagon twist, and I'll have my new pleat come in. But instead of 1 in, 1 out, it just goes 1 out, like if I was connecting to a pleat for a closed hexagon twist. And that's going to go 2 spaces up before I have my next pleat coming in on the diagonal, and then everything is 2-fold rotationally symmetric. My 2 sides are exactly the same, and I can go ahead and get this twist to lay flat, again using my bone folder to smooth out the parts that could wrinkle underneath. Okay, from here I'm going to choose to go up and around because it'll make easier triangle wraps. And if I'm paying attention to these vertical pleats, I can see that they come in tubes. So here when I open up, and I'm going to need to open this pleat overlap before I can open the overlap above, I'm going to need a vertical tube here. And I'm only running this pleat down until it hits the valley of the existing pleat that we just put in, and then I'll wrap the existing pleat around, which runs it in a new direction, erasing the old direction, forming a triangle wrap. And so from here, this doesn't look much like what we had before. And that's because I need to reach under and poke this up so that now I have the one in, one out, which I can then add the next pleat, just going one out, like it's meeting for, actually these three are all acting like they're meeting at a single point, and then run that 2 spaces up before I find my new diagonal, and then it's going to be one in, one out to get the vertical. And this is going to be a lot of layers when I fold this vertical pleat, but that's okay. And once we've got this hybrid hexagon, we can go ahead and squash. So notice this is an advanced twist, but I'm still folding it without pre-creasing. If you go back and look at the crease pattern in the recording, you can see that the folds that are introduced in addition to the grid here are exactly the same as the folds introduced by a open hexagon twist. So it's those diagonals running around in a hexagon. And we're able to fold this just with hands in a bone folder, nothing fancy. So that's a pretty neat result. Okay, so next up, I'm coming around to the next overlap. Again, opening the overlap that I just caused. And this one, remember we've got the one in, one out on these 2 pleats. And the third one is going to point at the point where the 2 existing ones intersect. And then it runs under the pleat from the latest hexagon. So I will put in a triangle wrap, and we'll resolve all of those triangle wraps once we get all the way around. And then the thing to remember is that they aren't just pointing to the same point. We've got this vertical stripe that they're aligned on, and so we're going to have 2 spaces up to get the next pleat. And then the vertical is going to be on the other side of this vertical stripe. And the final pleat is going to come to where those last 2 run into each other. And again, we have some pretty high density in here. We could have avoided the high density by going around in the other direction, but we would have had harder triangle wraps to deal with. So it's up to you what you think is worthwhile. And so we can get this twist in. It's a little bit fussy because of all the extra paper in there. And I'm going to now at this point rotate halfway around so we have the same view. And I'm going to repeat exactly those last 3 hexagons. So since I'm repeating, I'm going to move a little bit faster. And this is going to be causing a triangle wrap in here. And you can see the structure underneath kind of looks like a triangle wrap, but it's just going to stay there. I should say this structure in here, and then the pleat is running out this way and gets into the triangle wrap in here. And I have the bottom half of my new hybrid hexagon twist set up down here. The vertical pleats are going to be 2 spacings apart. The diagonal top right to bottom left pleats are going to be 2 spacings apart, and the top left to bottom right pleats are going to be exactly in line with each other. So that's caused by 2 of our direct gridline directions being or acting like open hexagon twists, and the third direction acting like a closed hexagon twist. So that actually is a good lead-in to discussing the other type of two-fold hybrid hexagon twist, which is, well, if we've tried 2 directions acting open and 1 direction acting closed, why not 2 directions acting closed and 1 direction acting open? So that was something that I didn't think was possible until I figured it out the other week. And yeah, there's a lot of possibilities using these twists. And if you're looking to learn more about hybrid hexagon twists, I do have a video about the 3-fold hybrid hexagon twist. And in a couple weeks, I'll be putting out a video about the general hybrid hexagon twist. So all of the forms, of which there are 14, not just the rotationally symmetric ones. So yeah, it's a wild ride. Oh, and here, because it's the last one around, we need to do something a little bit extra to get the triangle wrap in. So I found where this pleat was going to go, ran that valley through, popping down the existing pleat, and did a wrap on top of it. And squash. And by the way, I do have an eye on the chat if you have questions, or if you're watching the recording. I do respond to comments, so feel free to ask questions as you have them. So that's this setup, and I'm going to flip over so I can find those triangle wraps and squash them. And there's going to be 6 of them as I go around. And we can get a little bit more onto this grid, particularly out in these 2 corners. We can get another twist for sure. And part of that is I know that I lined us up on the paper so that the pattern repeats are aligned with the edge of the paper, at least the grid aligned edges. And so if we have this one and this one, we can get another one up here. So this is 1 ring around the center. I'm going to do 1 more twist in each corner and see where we end up. So the vertical pleats are always going to form tubes. So I can set up this triangle wrap here, and that's going to feed into my next twist. These 2 are the 2 on the bottom, so this third will come to exactly where they meet. And we're hitting the edge of the paper here before we can bring in the next 2 above. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that our opposite closed pleat still needs to be put in place, and I can get a partial triangle wrap there to keep it there. And we want to make sure we see the rectangle before we go to squash. So we can go ahead and, especially on the edge here, and since I'm using such big grid divisions, I can really go in and do it with my fingers. And let's see that one more time, rotating halfway around. I'm going to have a vertical tube. So that's 2 spaces between my fingers. And I'm going to cause a triangle wrap on the right. Let these mountains run into each other above. I'm going to get the third running into the same point. And then across the twist, I'm going to have another mountain on the same grid line as that third pleat, and do a little bit of a triangle wrap up above. So that's going to be my setup. And if I had more grid to work with here, I would be I would be going around and doing one twist at a time, doing 2 triangles for every new hexagon. Here, this partial triangle is going to be a little harder to squash, but we can get it into place by being careful that our valleys are actually on grid lines. And squash this guy here. And then I left those triangle wraps down here as well. And squash. And we could get into some more partial twists on the edges, but I don't think that it's necessary to attempt these advanced twists as partial twists. Excuse me. Pardon me. I don't think it's necessary to be doing these advanced twists as partial twists right away, and perhaps not ever, assuming that you're using certain structures. So this is the best tessellation to practice this twist in, but it's not the structure that really shows off its strong suit. So really quickly, I'm going to show the other 2-fold hybrid hexagon twist. I'm using this grid that's really beat up. And I'm going to first set up the open hexagon. I've been using this grid to test out like all of these hybrid twists, and so it's been through it, shall we say. And so I'm going to take a pair of opposite sides and bring them in just like we did with that first hybrid twist. And then I'm also going to pick another pair of opposite sides to bring in. And I'm going to arbitrarily choose the ones that I didn't tuck under. So this is the corner that's been tucked under. I'm going to choose the other one. And when I do that, I end up with this little flap that I'm going to lay down that way. And with the opposite side, again, bringing that up, shifting the pleat over, and I've got this little flap that I'm going to lay down flat. So we can have this diamond shape with 6 pleats, and it is also 2-fold rotationally symmetric, which brings me to the show and tell portion, where we have all kinds of new patterns that I've designed, some of which were on the thumbnail for this video, this one specifically. And actually this central arrangement of twists, the closed hexagon with the closed triangles around it, and I'll turn it so you can read the text, and then putting a twofold hybrid hexagon on the opposite side, works for all three possible orientations without causing a cursed triangle twist, which is pretty awesome and definitely not true for some other arrangements of central hexagon and triangles. So what's going on here is I'm using an extended symmetry. And you can look, I have a video on extended symmetries in Hexagon. I forget if I said hexagon symmetries or hexagon tilings, but regardless, extended symmetries on hexagons. And I'm using this twofold hybrid hexagon twist in a twofold rotationally symmetric position. And that is causing a new triangular interaction that's distinct from the one further in. And so we can have this in three different orientations around the same start. So I can go out, kind of around, and like really around. I haven't come up with better terminology for it, but let's say A, B, C orientations. And so you can use these twists from a center out perspective, although you might run into cursed triangle twists once you get into it. Or you can use these from a outside in perspective and have something like this, where I say, okay, I want these three to be touching each other over a closed triangle on the back. Now let me see, what can I fill in the center with? And there are multiple options for how to fill in the center. In this case though, it was pretty constrained because it's pretty dense in there, to an open hexagon with closed triangles around it. This is inlaid, a pattern that I folded like in the past week. And then there's a whole bunch of alternatives. So this is using that diamond twofold hexagon. And then there's different ways of using the rectangular twofold hexagon around open twists, around the closed triangle star that I taught in Advent of Tess, around the open triangle star. This is one with the diamonds again. You can even use them in other symmetries. So you can say, okay, I want to have these two next to each other, and then I'm going to have this closed triangle in between them, and they're going to make this wall. And so the twofold position is going to be between these two hybrid hexagon twists. Now what can I fill in the center with? And that actually also turns out to have that closed triangle star. They even came up, I was using a new tiling with a big hexagon in the middle and trapezoids, and then I needed a hexagon in a twofold rotationally symmetric position, and it just so happened that this hybrid hexagon was a good solution to then let me have the cluster of 6 triangles in a threefold rotationally symmetric position. So these are like some crazy ideas, and this is not even close to the full scope of things that you can fold with this twist. These are just the ones that I'm super excited about and have like taken the time to fold in the last couple weeks, since I figured out, well, first that you could use these twists in those twofold positions, because I mean, it's one thing to have the idea of like, oh, you can treat these twists that are hexagons in with other rotational symmetry properties. But it's a whole other thing to think, oh wow, now that I have these positions with 6 pleats with different rotational symmetry properties, how about I use a twist that has that maximum rotational symmetry for that position instead of like a hexagon and just treating it, or I should say a closed or an open, a standard hexagon, and just treating it like it has different symmetry. So there's so many patterns to explore, both designing from the inside out and designing from the outside in. I'm going to be talking more about designing from the inside out versus the outside in my next update for advanced twist techniques. I'm pretty sure the link for that's down below in the description. And this is the kind of thing that actually has some interesting planning properties too. My next update of the project planning masterclass is coming up in just under a month. And so if you go to training.gatheringfolds.com, you can find like all of my courses and see how I think about these things. But the basic summary is these small snippets are great for prototypes. But if you're going to be folding something bigger, if you're not just folding a practice piece, but you want to be folding something that has a border that you can like have nice pattern and then show that it's all from a single sheet of paper and you're not just like arbitrarily putting shapes together, this actually has structure, then you want to plan your project to align either the pattern repeats or the tiling breaks with the edge of the paper. So that's what I teach in the project planning masterclass. And the thing about these patterns where you're using the 2-fold hybrid hexagon twist in a 2-fold rotationally symmetric position on a hexagons and triangles tiling, and don't worry if that doesn't make sense right away, is that the pattern repeats are aligned with the tiling breaks. And also, the fact that these 2-fold rotationally symmetric hybrid hexagon twists have a grid intersection at the center means that you're going to have a more reasonable fraction for your grid rotation because those 2 points that you're measuring between are closer together when you're measuring for that rotation. So I'm super excited about these patterns. I expect to see a lot more of them in my future. And I'm also excited about the other patterns that you can make with hybrid hexagon twists, the general hybrid hexagon twists, which again, I have a video coming out in a couple weeks about. So with those, you tend to go for further symmetries, doing some crazy things because most of those 14 different options do not have rotational symmetry. There's the closed and open end members that have 6-fold rotational symmetry. There's one option with 3-fold and 2 options with 2-fold. The rest, the other 9, do not have rotational symmetry. And you can make some really cool things with them. So I'll leave you with that. Happy folding, and I hope you try out some of these patterns for yourself. All right. Oh, one last thing. I've been working on putting together a way for people to get access to all of the patterns that I fold, like including these prototypes, not just the ones that I put up on Instagram. And by the way, the Instagram has a 1-year backlog, so it would be like getting access to things way sooner than you would usually see them. And that is something that I'll be announcing more about in the next update to the Project Planning Masterclass. So that's a bit of extra reason to go check that out. So happy folding, everyone, and I will see you next week.